And here I thought the SEC is overrated stuff was going to just die in football. Kudos to the SEC. They found a way to let everyone throw that chant back at them in football and basketball this year after we watched the first round of the NCAA tournament. And yes, I realize first 2 rounds of the tournament, I realize that I'm saying that as the SEC put a record 7 teams into the Sweet 16. That is very deceiving. And this is very much it's a propaganda war. This is exactly like everything that happens in America these days. You're going to get the SEC touting how great this is, but if you dive into it, very deceptive. Very, very deceptive. This will get both sides to death. You're going to have 2 totally different sides on this. Okay, so hear me out. Yes, the SEC got 7 teams into the Sweet 16. They had 14 teams in the NCAA tournament, both records. So obviously, if you're the SEC, you're going to tout that. That's going to be on the banner. That's going to be on all the social media stuff. You will run with that. Greg Sankey is going to love that. All those things. However, if you take a deeper look here, it's just they spammed the tournament. That's really what it is. They spammed the tournament. If you throw 14 teams in there, a bunch of them are probably bound to make the Sweet 16. And really the issue here is the middle to bottom of the league. I would compare the SEC in basketball this year to kind of like the Big Ten in football. Top heavy, really good teams at the top, and they proved that through the first 2 rounds of the tournament. No real argument here. Your Auburn, Alabama, Florida, although, Florida definitely really got pushed. Your teams at the top, Tennessee, performed well, and they're on to the Sweet 16. But the middle to bottom of that league did not do well. They were 8-6, okay, in the first round. The 2 teams that went 6-12 in the league that happened to make the tournament, which was just ridiculous, both lost their first game. Oklahoma goes down. Texas pretty unceremoniously goes down in the play-in game. What were we doing having those 2 teams in there? That was a farce. Georgia was down 27-3 to Gonzaga. 27-3. That's a team that gets in an 8-9 game. Did we need Georgia in the tournament? That's not football, by the way, Bulldogs. That's basketball, 27-3. And if we look at where all these teams are seated, the only team that played above its seed was Arkansas. So Arkansas does get to the Sweet 16. Congratulations there. I've got nothing bad to say. You did have somebody overperform there. To offset that, Texas A&M did not play to its seed. They lost to Michigan and did not make it onto the Sweet 16. But the real kicker here is if you look at the record that was broken to get the 7 teams to the Sweet 16, that was the ACC, which 9 years ago sent 6 teams to the Sweet 16. And that year, talk about ratios here, that year the ACC sent 6 of 7 teams that they had in the tournament to the Sweet 16. That's the ratio that you're trying to go for if you're going to be special. If you're just spamming the chat with a bunch of teams and half of them stumble their way into the Sweet 16, okay, you had so many chances there, right? You had so many lottery tickets that they're bound to hit. It's like the NFL draft. A lot, you want draft capital, so you have all these different lottery tickets to spend, take your shot, and you're bound to hit. If you have 14 draft picks, there's going to be a better chance that you brag about picking up a couple of all pros than if you only had 7 draft picks, right? You had more chances to do it. And that's what the SEC had here. So this is not the flex that SEC fans think that it is at all. The Big Ten had a tremendous tournament. The Big 12 has had a tremendous tournament so far. If you break it down, by the way, to the point that I'm making about the middle to bottom of the SEC, if you break it down, the top 8 teams in the SEC went 7-1, and the bottom 6 out of the 14 that made it, so not the true bottom 6 teams in the league, but close to it, the bottom 6 went 1-5. And that's really the point here. The SEC did not deserve some kind of crazy special treatment as a league that deserved an overwhelming amount of teams in that would be record setting. That's not what this conference was this year. If we start running through this, Mizzou lost to an 11 seed. They got beat by Drake. That's with a bunch of fans there in that arena because Mizzou got to play in Wichita, not too far away. As I mentioned, Gonzaga just totally boat raced Georgia. I mean, boat raced them. Texas and Oklahoma both fell flat. Mississippi State lost to Baylor. And Mississippi State was the team that was just totally fading by the end of the season. You could see that coming a mile away. So that's the whole point here. You know, it's just like in football, the conversation was not, hey, the SEC is a terrible conference. The conversation was the SEC does not deserve special treatment in the postseason in terms of who you're putting in there because they were not a special league this year. That's just the harsh reality that they're going to have to accept. I'm sorry. And this is the same thing. Although in this case, we're just adjudicating this after the fact because the SEC got 14 teams in. There's nothing that we can actually do about that. And in some ways, like this was kind of bound to happen. Like the SEC should not have had 14 teams in. It set the league up for a level of disappointment here because if you do that, it clearly was not the right thing to do. And you were going to throw teams out there into the deep end that weren't going to be able to swim. And you would have a lot of teams losing. And this happens whenever we dub a conference like the best ever, which is what a lot of the talk was about the SEC. It typically comes back to bite you. And it definitely did here. It was like last year, Big 12, got a lot of juice. And there was all the talk with the ACC and Brad Brownell and, people getting really annoyed with it. Same as this year. And then the Big 12 kind of fell flat in the NCAA tournament. So, we'll see. The advantage here, the SEC does. I mean, I think those teams at the top are very good. They're probably going to get at least a team into the Final Four, I would imagine. Again, they're throwing numbers at it here in the Sweet 16 in the second weekend of the tournament. So, maybe it winds up being like a 3 SEC teams in the Final Four or something, and this narrative will flip again. It very well could, but don't let the SEC flex the 7 for 14 thing on you right now, because it's deceptive and it's very much missing the point.